If we're to understand the full nature of the threat posed by the likes of Suhail Khan, which is, as Sun Tzu admonishes, a prerequisite to countering that threat, we need to examine the Khan case study in closer detail.
The evidence that Suhail Khan is a Muslim Brotherhood operative rests on 4 pillars. We'll discuss each in turn in this part of the course. We'll explore both the extensive ties of Suhail Khan to the Muslim Brotherhood and those he has cultivated in his own right for decades. We'll see the high regard in which Khan is held by the Brotherhood. Third, we'll dissect how Suhail Khan has postured himself concerning the Muslim Brotherhood in America. Finally, we'll take stock of the real service Khan has performed for the Islamist cause, both in the past and at present.
In the end, in the absence of something like a Muslim Brotherhood membership card with Suhail Khan's name on it, the available evidence can be challenged as circumstantial. Yet each pillar is damning, and together they constitute a portrait of an influence operator that more than meets a reasonable standard of the burden of proof. That's especially the case if the point of the exercise is not a criminal prosecution, but damage control on a real and present danger to a political community that has clearly been, as we have seen in the previous part of this briefing, targeted by the Muslim Brotherhood and its friends.
Let's start this case study by recalling a document that bears directly on the extent and nature of the ties Suhail Khan's family has had to the Muslim Brotherhood. The list of what the Ikhwan's 1991 strategic plan called our organizations and organizations of our friends. It turns out that Suhail Khan's parents, Mahbub Khan, who had a PhD in engineering, and Malika Khan, were founders of at least 4 of the most important groups on the Muslim Brotherhood's list. They weren't loosely affiliated with these fronts. They weren't just members of them. They created them, including the Muslim Students Association, the very first fruit of the effort to establish in America what the Ikhwan's phased plan calls secret leadership. They also created the Muslim Brotherhood's largest front, the Islamic Society of North America, and a prominent Ikhwan operation in Northern California, the Muslim Community Association. Malika Khan also served for years on the board of directors of the California branch of the Council on American Islamic Relations, the offshoot of one of the other fronts on the Muslim Brotherhood's list, the Islamic Association for Palestine. Like any secretive society, whether it's the mafia or an ideologically driven group like the communists, family bona fides matter. When the family has played as important a leadership role as that of the Khans, it confers a highly privileged status on the offspring. In communist China, for example, such children of leading figures of the party elite are known as princelings, and they tend to enjoy great influence and power. Suhail Khan has to be considered a princeling of the Muslim Brotherhood unless, as we will discuss shortly, there is convincing evidence to the contrary. What is more, Suhail Khan has long had his own ties to these and other Brotherhood organizations, including as a featured speaker at many of their meetings. Here are highlights of a particularly revealing speech Khan made at the 1999 annual convention of the largest Muslim Brotherhood front in the country, the Islamic Society of North America.
The earliest defenders of Islam would defend their more numerous and better equipped oppressors because the early Muslims loved death, dying for the sake of Almighty Allah, more than the oppressors of Muslims love life. This must be the case when we are fighting life's other battles. What are our oppressors going to do with people like us? We're prepared to give our lives for the cause of Islam. I have pledged my life's work, inspired by my dear father's shining legacy and inspired further by my mother's loving protection and support, to work for the Ummah.
When Suhail Khan addressed another Ikhwan Front's annual conference, its founder, Abdurrahman Alamoudi, gave him an effusive introduction.
Suhail Khan is the son of a dear, dear brother who was a pioneer of Islam work himself. Many of you know his late father, may Allah bless him, who was part of all kinds of work. And alhamdulillah, Suhail inherited from his father not only being a Muslim and a Muslim activist, but also being a Muslim political activist.
Alamuti's remarks not only confirmed the importance to the Brotherhood of Suhail Khan's lineage, they explicitly exulted about his political work on behalf of the Ummah in America. When Suhail Khan spoke, following Alamuti's effusive introduction, he knew full well that his host was a terrorist sympathizer, if not actually a terrorist himself. One might reasonably ask, what was a White House representative doing there at all? At the very least, one can only be astounded at Khan's equally lavish praise for such a jihadist. Note how Suhail Khan responded in kind to Alamuti's warm, rhetorical embrace.
One small thank you for the people that have been helping me keep going. Abdurrahman Alamuti have been also very supportive of me, and I want to give them thanks. Many of you, of course, knew my father, and he was someone who dedicated his life to the community, and I've always felt that I have to work in that same those footsteps.
Third, it's instructive that Suhail Khan has never publicly denounced the organizations his parents founded, or otherwise disassociated himself from them. To the contrary, he has spoken proudly of his parents and their work, as he did at the ISNA conference in 2001.
It is a special honor for me to be here before you today because I'm always reminded of the legacy of my father, Dr. Mahbub Khan, an early founder of the Muslim Students Association in the mid-60s, an active member of the organization through its growth and development into the Islamic Society of North America.
As we have seen, former revolutionary leftist David Horowitz is deeply knowledgeable about families involved in ideological cadres, be they communists like his parents or Islamists like the Khans. At the 2011 Conservative Political Action Conference, David Horowitz delivered a blistering warning to the right about the danger posed by Suhail Khan and his enabler, Grover Norquist. He specifically drew on his own personal experience to illuminate the significance of Khan's failure to break with his parents over their prominent roles in the Muslim Brotherhood and its civilization jihad. Here's an excerpt of David Horowitz's warning.
As for the question of whether Suhail Khan believes now what he openly said then, my answer is this. When an honest person has been a member of a destructive movement and leaves it, he will feel compelled to repudiate it publicly and to warn others of the dangers it poses. This is a sure test of whether someone has left the Muslim Brotherhood or not. I urge conservatives to school themselves in the nature of the Muslim Brotherhood and the networks it has spawned, and to be vigilant against its spread into the ranks of the conservative movement, the Republican Party, and the government of the country we love. Thank you.
Far from acknowledging, to say nothing of disavowing, his parents' seminal role in the Muslim Brotherhood in America, Suhail Khan has repeatedly tried to mislead non-Muslim audiences about their affiliation with the Ikhwan and the character of the organizations they founded. For example, here are comments he made in a debate with me on Anderson Cooper 360 in January 2011.
Mr. Khan, I want to ask you about some of the specific claims that Mr. Gaffney has been making about you, and there are a lot of them. I mean, was your father part of the Muslim Brotherhood?
No, he was not. He was a high-tech engineer in the Bay Area. Frank's allegations go back to 10 years. They're completely false.
Mr. Khan, these organizations that he's mentioned, are they all fronts for the Muslim Brotherhood?
No, they're not. They haven't been proved as such. If they were, they'd be shut down, as you rightly pointed out.
They actually have been proved as such.
Reputable people, including the federal government, has looked into these accusations, have found they're completely baseless.
Let's examine Suhail Khan's assertion that the Muslim Brotherhood fronts have not been proved as such. Actually, to the contrary, federal authorities have amply proven that organizations like ISNA and CARE are Ikhwan operations, and in 2 different courts of law, no less. Specifically, as we've discussed previously, this reality was made plain in documents introduced without objection by the defense in the trial of the Holy Land Foundation terrorism financing conspiracy. When 3 of those listed as unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial, on the basis of that evidence, namely the Islamic Society of North America, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and the North American Islamic Trust, contested that status, the presiding judge confirmed that such a designation was justified. When the 3 Muslim Brotherhood fronts appealed Judge Solis's ruling, they were rebuffed by a unanimous Fifth Circuit appellate panel.
In short, Suhail Khan has flatly contradicted and misrepresented the truth with respect to Muslim Brotherhood organizations in this country with which his parents were intimately involved. It's important to understand that such lying is a practice that is not only condoned by Sharia. According to that doctrine, it is obligatory for Muslims to lie when they feel afraid or threatened or the good of the faith demands it. Such lying is called taqiyya in Arabic. The question occurs, if Suhail Khan is prepared to lie about what is demonstrably true, what else is he lying about?
How about this whopper? On the margins of the 2011 CPAC meeting sponsored by the American Conservative Union, Suhail Khan made an astonishing assertion.
What I have a problem with is they say, jihad is their way, martyrdom is their goal. I mean, that is antithetic to everything the Constitution says.
I understand all of those things.
You got your answers.
No, I understand all of those
things. Do you agree with that too, Mr. Khan?
With what?
That we should be outreaching to the Muslim Brotherhood and
well, the Nation of Islam.
Muslim Brotherhood in the United States.
There's no Muslim Brotherhood in the United States.
No.
As we've established abundantly to this point in the course, this statement is taqiyya, pure and simple. It is a brazen effort that is contradicted by readily available evidence, including facts established in a court, that is designed to mislead and disinform conservatives and other Americans.
Let's turn finally to Khan's service to the Muslim Brotherhood and its agenda. Back in 1999, when Suhail Khan told the Islamic Society of North America convention that he had dedicated his life to the Ummah and extolled the Islamists loving death more than their enemies love life, he was a recent graduate of the University of California at Berkeley and a member of the staff of California Congressman Tom Campbell. Campbell was a liberal Republican who represented parts of the Bay Area, the same region in which Mahbub Khan had set up the Brotherhood's Muslim Community Association. On Congressman Campbell's staff, Suhail Khan worked on legislation that we have seen became, thanks to Sami Al-Arian, a top agenda item for the Muslim Brotherhood in America, namely, a prohibition on so-called secret evidence. At the time of that ISNA speech, Khan had also become a member of the board of directors of the Alamudi Norquist Islamic Institute. Khan's connections to Tom Campbell, the Islamic Institute, and most especially Grover Norquist, helped credential him as a Republican. They also facilitated his involvement, together with that of the Institute's executive director, Khalid Safouri, with the Bush 2000 campaign's outreach to the Muslim community, a priority for the candidate's chief strategist, Karl Rove. As a result of the roles played in the campaign by Islamist operatives like Safouri and Khan, not only did Sami Al-Arian get to meet Governor Bush, in October 2000, Al-Arian extracted, with help as well from Grover Norquist, a commitment from the Republican nominee that, as president, he would work to eliminate secret evidence. Thanks also to Grover Norquist's sponsorship, the relationships Suhail Khan established during the 2000 presidential campaign helped him secure a full-time volunteer position in the White House Office of Public Liaison under Karl Rove. In this role, Suhail Khan became, for most of 2001, what amounted to the Muslim gatekeeper for President Bush, a critical position for the Brotherhood's damage control operations after their co-religionists' attack in September of that year. Suhail Khan made the most of his role in the White House. He facilitated the sorts of access and legitimacy that we have seen were exploited by Muslim Brotherhood operatives like Khalid Safouri, Nihad Awad, Sami Al-Arian, and Muzammil Siddiqui. Such influence in turn translated into official portrayals of the nature of the enemy and its motivations that ceded critical information dominance to the Islamists. Illustrative examples of such submissions to the Islamists' disabling taqiyya include statements by President Bush to the effect that, quote, Islam is a religion of peace, unquote. As we have seen, while many millions of Muslims practice their faith in a way that is peaceful, millions more adhere to Sharia's dictates, which are anything but peaceable. Another example is jihad is about personal struggle, not holy war. This statement not only misrepresents the nature of jihad as defined by Sharia, it has allowed jihadists like Major Nidal Malik Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter, to hide in plain sight as they pursue their violent agenda. Another example is a statement to the effect that, quote, Al-Qaeda is hijacking Islam, just as it hijacked airliners on 9/11, unquote. In fact, as discussed previously, Al-Qaeda is faithfully implementing the dictates of what is the mainstream doctrine of Islam, Sharia, and its obligation to engage in jihad to achieve that doctrine's supremacy worldwide. Such statements play into the Muslim Brotherhood's efforts to deflect attention from their civilization jihad by encouraging the belief that the only enemy we confront is Al-Qaeda. Such taqiyya and the information dominance it encouraged, with considerable help from those like Suhail Khan and Grover Norquist, who promoted it from within official Republican and conservative circles, left the United States government ill-equipped to understand our foes at a critical moment. Suhail Khan's role at the White House enabled him to promote the same agenda he had tried to enact while in Representative Campbell's office, Sami Al-Arian's bid to prohibit the use of secret evidence. In September 2001, shortly before the 9/11 attacks, Al-Arian took advantage of speaking to the Islamic Society of North America convention immediately before Suhail Khan. He used the occasion for two purposes. First, to remind the White House liaison of the necessity of getting President Bush to act on his commitment to prohibit secret evidence, and second, to help Khan do that by whipping the crowd to engage in what the Muslim Brotherhood's phase plan calls the political pressure approach with the government. Al-Arian called for his fellow Islamists immediately to send the president 50,000 emails, phone calls, and faxes in order to get a meeting and fulfillment of the campaign quid pro quo.
The White House has said that they will not issue a statement or a position before sometime in September. That means we have few days to work on this. Our hope is to generate thousands of calls to the White House asking them to support H.R. 1266, Secret Evidence Repeal Act. Again, that's H.R. 1266, the bill that has been sponsored chiefly by Congressman Bonnier. That bill has to receive the support, has to receive the support of the White House so that eventually it will become the law of the land, where no secret evidence will ever be used against anyone, Muslims or otherwise.
For his part, Suhail Khan was at pains in his response to assure the crowd that the Bush administration was determined to fulfill the president's commitment to do something about secret evidence. Perhaps thanks to the pressure thus generated, Grover Norquist, Khalid Safouri, and Suhail Khan were able to get a meeting with the president for their Muslim Brotherhood cadre. This undated document reportedly was the access list for that White House meeting. It has the names, dates of birth, and Social Security numbers, the information required for clearance into the White House complex and other restricted facilities for 49 individuals. They constitute an impressive array of Muslim Brotherhood operatives and affiliated groups. The importance of Norquist and Safuri in this event is evident from their prominent placement on this undated document. 2 months later, Grover Norquist's enabling role was publicly confirmed by John Zogby, an eminent Arab-American pollster whose family, despite its Christian Lebanese roots, has long been active with Islamist organizations and other Muslim American communities. Zogby declared, quote, "Absolutely, Norquist is central to the White House outreach," unquote.
Incredible as it may seem, the day selected for the secret evidence with President Bush was 9/11. Even more incredible, when the White House complex was closed due to the danger of still more attacks on Washington, the Muslim activists who had planned to have pre-meetings there had to relocate. They wound up moving to the conference room the Center for Security Policy shared at the time with Americans for Tax Reform. Had it not been for the providential fact that I was standing in the doorway of my office when they poured off the elevators and walked down the hall towards me, I wouldn't have known or, frankly, believed that they were there on that day of all days. Bringing up the rear of this group, decked out in a wide variety of Muslim regalia, from women in hijabs and men in flowing robes and Armani suits, were Grover Norquist and Suhail Khan, talking together very animatedly. I only recently learned that one of my colleagues, upon hearing what was going on in the conference room next to his office, lifted up the false ceiling to listen in on part of the conversation. Here's what Dr. J. Michael Waller overheard.
I was there on 9/11 when Grover Norquist met with his Muslim Brotherhood people to do damage control for the Muslim Brotherhood and their fronts. He had planned for that day in advance a meeting with President George W. Bush at the White House with Grover's Muslim outreach people, in which they had arranged ahead of time for President Bush to come out against the so-called secret evidence law. This was a ACLU-backed, National Lawyers Guild-backed initiative, Muslim Brotherhood-backed initiative, to abolish legislation that President Clinton had signed to allow our immigration judges to use classified intelligence when judging terrorism deportation cases. So Grover was against this rule. He wanted to deprive our counterterrorism authorities of this ability before 9/11 even struck. So before 9/11, he had arranged this meeting at the White House and had the Muslim Brotherhood people assemble at his office at Americans for Tax Reform. I know this because at the time I was with the Center for Security Policy, where we sublet space from Grover, and my office happened to share the same common wall as the conference room where Grover held his famous Wednesday group meetings. And it was in that conference room that Grover brought the Muslim Brotherhood folks to do, well, not to rally them to defend America against those who would destroy us, but contrarily to plot to put the Muslim Brotherhood front groups in the most positive light possible during 9/11, to make sure that the Muslim Brotherhood people would not be targets of any American opprobrium or official investigation. So it was damage control for the Muslim Brotherhood, not rallying American Muslims to come to the defense of America. That was the purpose of Grover's meeting that day on the afternoon of September 11th, 2001. Now, I know this personally in part because I spoke to some of the people involved. I knew and have been friends for years with some of the people who worked for Grover at Americans for Tax Reform, and were very upset as insiders about what they saw happening, but they couldn't say anything because their jobs depended on them going along with it. But also during the meeting, I was able to listen into some of the discussion because my office, again, shared the same wall as Grover's Wednesday group conference room. So for the first time ever, I decided I'm going to hear what's going on there, because I used to attend the Wednesday group meetings. And so I pushed up the ceiling tiles in my office, and I was able to listen to what was going on next door. That's how I know that it was a damage control meeting, and part of the discussion included how to condemn the 9/11 attacks and how not to condemn them. And because some of the people present wanted to justify some of the attacks or refused to condemn the attack on the Pentagon because it was a, quote, military target, the general consensus was that they would condemn the attacks against innocent civilians with the implicit, unstated understanding that this was not condemning the attack on the Pentagon. Subsequently, there was a full-page ad that was taken out in the New York Times with similar language, condemning the attacks on innocent civilians, but it was sort of the Muslim Brotherhood code word for we're not going to condemn the attack on the Pentagon. So that's what Grover Norquist was doing on September 11th, 2001.
Sometime after 9/11, however, the Brotherhood suffered a significant reverse. Suhail Khan lost his position in the White House. Evidently, someone had tumbled onto the fact that Suhail Khan's father was a prominent Muslim brother. At one point, Grover Norquist heatedly accused me of calling him a terrorist. Had I known then what I know now, I certainly would have called him a stealth jihadist. But in the event, Khan's departure was engineered by somebody unknown to me and in a position at least to get him out of the White House. Around that time, Norquist publicly extended an emotional apology to Khan at one of the Wednesday morning meetings for what was being, quote, done to him, unquote. Only Norquist's Islamists in the room would have understood why Suhail Khan was being given, at Grover's instigation, a standing ovation. It stands to reason that the White House was anxious to avoid a public falling out with Suhail Khan or others in the Muslim community who it had been cultivating for several years. Consequently, Khan was swiftly found a political appointment as a special assistant in the office of the Secretary of Transportation. At the time, the department was led by former Democratic Congressman Norm Mineta. In 2006, Mary Peters replaced Secretary Mineta, and, in due course, she promoted Suhail Khan, the young man she had inherited from her predecessor, and made him her assistant for policy. In 2007, Khan received the department's Gold Medal for outstanding achievement. More importantly, Suhail Khan received in the course of his service at the Department of Transportation a highly prized credential, a security clearance. Thanks to the nature of the department's responsibilities and a policy portfolio that would allow oversight of all aspects of those duties, he would have had access to a wealth of extremely sensitive information. That would include, for example, data about the movement of nuclear, military, or other hazardous materials, counter-terror techniques, and emergency procedures. While Suhail Khan's gatekeeper position at the White House was incredibly useful for the Islamist team, in the wrong hands, the sort of information to which Khan would have been privy at Transportation could prove a very real windfall for our enemies and a threat to our security. It must be granted that Suhail Khan is an engaging person who has cultivated numerous friends and admirers during his years in Washington. That shouldn't be surprising. Trained counterterrorism experts have noted that Muslim Brotherhood tradecraft results in the brother routinely being the nicest guy in the room. Khan's affable demeanor, combined with his clean-shaven appearance and skill in taqiyya, are generally more than enough to mislead the average person about his abiding dedication and service to the Ummah. In the event his friends and acquaintances are unavoidably confronted with warnings about Khan's actual associations and activities, however, they typically take refuge in a line that Khan himself regularly promotes, namely, that he wouldn't have gotten a security clearance if there were a problem with his background. In fact, as people familiar with the dismal state of the background investigation and clearance approval process can attest, that system is seriously dysfunctional. To reduce a backlog in such investigations, daily quotas for processing them have been used, a formula for rubber stamping people who should not be cleared. It's a safe bet that the background of a political appointee the White House felt a powerful need to place would probably be given particularly superficial examination. That would likely be particularly true if the appointee is going to the Transportation Department, not generally regarded as a sensitive posting like, say, the Pentagon or CIA. In short, far from vindicating Khan, knowing what we do about his history, activities, and agendas, his getting cleared is evidence of a grave problem with the clearance process.
Dr. J. Michael Waller.
Since 9/11, it's been very hard for the U.S. government to do proper vetting of people because of the huge demand there was for a large number of cleared people in a very short amount of time. So what the different government agencies did was they hired a lot of outside contractors to do the vetting, and even outside contractors and regular civil servants had such a huge caseload that over time they had to clear 7 people a day, sometimes 20 people a day, and there's no way in the world you can do an adequate background investigation more than just a couple a day. This involves going into everybody's background and into their personal lives and mainly into their character. And what the government did as a shortcut was to vet people by going through police records, criminal records, court records, and so forth, and to see if they'd violated any laws. Well, a Muslim Brotherhood plant in the United States is not going to be here violating laws if his job is to infiltrate our political system. Therefore, he's going to fall completely clear of how we've been doing our background investigations and will come up completely clean. And that's what happened indeed with terrorists. Mohammed Atta, the mastermind, or the one who led the 9/11 attacks here, was here legally. He had cleared our system. He did not have a criminal record. And so you can see how easy it was at the time for people to get their clearances, as it still is. Now, in my job as a graduate professor in the national security field, I've helped more than a dozen different federal agencies on background investigations of people going in for their clearances. And I can say that these folks are overwhelmed. They cannot do the adequate investigations that they know they need to do. And I can speak with personal experience with FBI, CIA, Defense Security Service, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, Department of Homeland Security, and elsewhere. They do not have the database, and they don't even have the proper parameters under which to investigate somebody. For example, during the Cold War, they took Communist Party membership as a very important criterion. If someone was a Communist Party member, it wasn't the fact that the person was a Marxist that was of concern. You could be a Marxist and still get a security clearance. If you were a Communist Party member, it meant you were under the operational control of a foreign entity, in this case controlled by the Soviet Union, whose goal was to overthrow the Constitution of the United States. Well, that's the same criteria that one would apply to the Muslim Brotherhood. But because the Muslim Brotherhood is not identified as a hostile foreign service, it is not considered actively as a means of vetting someone. So you can be a member of the Muslim Brotherhood and still be vetted and cleared. Most of the time, Muslim Brotherhood doesn't even come up because they say, oh, you're Muslim, oh, then we won't. Religion's completely off limits. So that is not a factor in determining criminal background investigations now, or security investigations. What I will say, though, is some of the questions are, has the individual expressed a desire or a belief in overthrowing the Constitution of the United States? Or do you think this person is disloyal to the United States? And the answer, of course, for anybody who's in the Muslim Brotherhood would be absolutely yes. But in the case of the really good agents who are planted here, or the people here who are recruited by the Muslim Brotherhood, they're really outgoing. Some of them act like political conservatives or hardcore constitutionalists. They're not going to come across, first, as open members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and second, as people who are out to overthrow the Constitution. So they still fall through the cracks in any security investigation.
Finally, let's review 4 illustrative examples of the recent and continuing contributions Suhail Khan is making to the Islamist cause. These involve 1. Gaining access to and influence over key institutions of the conservative movement and Republican Party. 2. Acquiring a political vehicle of his own to confer movement leadership status on him and his initiatives. Then there's this. Suhail Khan was given the honor of leading the Pledge of Allegiance at dinners for thousands of attendees held during conservative political action conferences in 2011 and 2012. Such a prominent role was a wonderful twofer for an influence operator interested in further burrowing into the conservative community and Republican Party targeted by his friends in the Muslim Brotherhood. First, and most obviously, being given the job of leading a loyalty oath to the United States is a highly visible and none too subtle way for the conservatives who run CPAC to endorse Khan and repudiate those who have warned about his personal history and current activities on behalf of Islamist organizations and agendas. Second, such a role at CPAC affirms that Suhail Khan is a conservative leader, which has been, as we have seen, one of Khan's priorities, and that of his enabler, Grover Norquist. 3. Promoting a vehicle for penetrating a key and largely conservative population, non-Muslim religious communities. And 4. Eliminating impediments to zakat, or tithing, for Muslims. Let's take each in turn. First, Grover Norquist delivered yet another break for the Islamists' influence operation targeting the right when, in 2007, he engineered Suhail Khan's election as a fellow member of the board of directors of the largest conservative umbrella organization in the country, the American Conservative Union. As noted elsewhere, the ACU sponsors the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC. In recent years, Norquist and Khan have used their board positions to try, with mixed results, to shape the CPAC program and selection of speakers so as to deny platforms at the conference to their critics and to promote their friends. Grover Norquist and Suhail Khan have used, among other venues, CPAC to legitimate and engage groups fundamentally at odds with conservative values and Republican politics. For example, such discordant views were on display in a panel discussion on the margins of CPAC 2011. Which brings us, secondly, to the so-called Conservative Inclusion Coalition. This group is an Americans for Tax Reform-sponsored entity that appears to have been designed by Grover Norquist primarily to give Suhail Khan a prominent leadership position within the conservative movement. In the same meeting amidst CPAC 2011, where Khan declared that, quote, "there's no Muslim Brotherhood in the United States," unquote, his Conservative Inclusion Coalition gave a platform to one panelist who recommended that the conservative movement invite into its ranks the hard left, racist, and Reconquista Hispanic group known as La Raza. Another panelist thought Louis Farrakhan's Nation of Islam should be admitted to the conservative movement. When it was pointed out that the Nation of Islam supported killing Jews, she insisted they should be included even if she doesn't agree with all of their positions. If such efforts to extend a big tent conservatism to Hispanic radicals and virulent black Muslims have not borne fruit to date, another dubious group has been admitted to CPAC. Another indication of Suhail Khan's successful penetration of the right was his selection to serve on the National Security Steering Committee for CPAC 2012. In 2011, Suhail Khan became a Washington lobbyist for Microsoft, a company notorious for its hostility to conservatives and their causes. This made it all the more astounding when Khan used one of Grover Norquist's center-right meetings to represent himself as the Republican National Committee's liaison for outside organizations and interests. He invited anyone who wished to communicate with the RNC to use him for that purpose. Third, following the end of the Bush 43 administration, Suhail Khan sought out a new niche from which to engage in another area of civilization, jihad, co-opting and undermining leaders of other religions in the name of interfaith dialogue.
The Institute for Global Engagement's partner, Georgetown University, was compromised in part thanks to a December 2005 gift of $20 million from a billionaire Saudi prince named Al-Walid bin Talal, who has long used his wealth to promote civilization jihad in myriad ways. Those resources and the infrastructure they made possible have helped mainstream one of the most insidious forms of this sort of jihad, the penetration, co-option, and suborning of other non-Muslim religious institutions. As we discussed in Part 2 of this course, such initiatives are often cloaked as bridge building aimed at fostering understanding across various faith traditions. This gambit is hugely seductive to Western denominations in particular. Their dogma teaches, after all, a tolerance that lends itself to ecumenicalism and generosity with respect, for example, to opening churches and synagogues to use by Sharia-adherent Muslims. This sentiment is, of course, powerfully reinforced by the U.S. Constitution's guarantee of religious liberty. In practice, however, for its Muslim adherents, this Sharia activity is really just another vehicle for dawah, or proselytization in Arabic.
A prime example of the sort of one-way bridge building Qutb had in mind was a clever influence operation involving a trip to Auschwitz and other Holocaust sites, ostensibly to promote interfaith understanding on behalf of Khan's Institute for Global Engagement. Among the Islamists on the trip was Muzammil Siddiqui, the radical Southern California imam who was formerly the president of the United States' largest Muslim Brotherhood front, the Islamic Society of North America. Also along was former ISNA Secretary General Saeed Syed. Then there was the current ISNA president, Mohammed Majid. A Jewish participant was President Obama's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, Hannah Rosenthal.
I had an opportunity to put a question to Ambassador Rosenthal shortly after the trip, and in the wake of President Obama's Muslim Outreach 2.0 address at the State Department in May 2012. That was the speech where the president formally adopted the Palestinian position with his portentous demand that Israel return to the pre-1967 borders. I wanted to know why Mohammed Majid, a top Muslim Brotherhood operative, was sitting near the Secretary of State at that event. Ambassador Rosenthal was clearly taken aback by my characterization of Majid and responded, "Oh, no, Muhammad isn't that. There are others, but he's a good guy. Suhail Khan introduced me to him. We went to Auschwitz together. I arranged for him to attend the president's speech." In other words, a senior U.S. government figure was misled on the basis of her participation in an influence operation run by Suhail Khan in the guise of interfaith dialogue about the true nature of a top Muslim Brotherhood operative. On the basis of that deception, she sought to secure for that operative very favorable treatment at a critical moment for U.S. policy towards the Middle East in general and the Ikhwan in particular. I subsequently learned that Imam Majid actually had another reason for being given such preferential treatment. Here's the remarkable account of the run-up to the president's speech of May 19, 2011, when Senator Dan Letterman of South Dakota happened to observe part of it.
In May of 2011, I had the opportunity to meet Imam Mohammed Majid at an interfaith dialogue in Minneapolis. Following the dialogue, we shared a cab to the airport where Majid had been beckoned by the White House to come and advise the president on Middle East policy. The next day, I noticed that Majid and several others were in the background before the president gave a rather interesting speech on Middle East affairs, including the mentioning of the 1967 borders with Israel. And it seemed pretty apparent that Majid and the friends that had gotten together at the White House the night before had some effect on the president and the policies that he was supporting.
To be sure, as is discussed elsewhere in this course, Mohammed Majid's visits to the White House and State Department in connection with this presidential address were not the first Obama administration events in which he and or other Muslim brothers have been present. But the anecdotal evidence surrounding this one is indicative of how deeply the Brotherhood has penetrated the U.S. government and the continuing contribution being made to that penetration by Suhail Khan. As it happens, Suhail Khan and Mohammed Majid have also joined forces in at least one other venture, an initiative called Muflihun, or Successful in Arabic. Muflihun is a reference to Quran 3:104. Quote, "Let there be arising from you a nation, inviting to all that is good, enjoining what is right, and forbidding what is wrong, and those will be the successful." Unquote. For the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamists, what is good and wrong are defined not by Western values, but by Sharia. According to that doctrine, the Muflihun are successful when they secure Sharia's triumph in a global Islamic nation. Suhail Khan is the chairman of the board, and Mohammed Majid the vice chairman of Muflihun. It has as its stated vision, quote, "to help establish a community that promotes good works and justice while peacefully working against injustice and wrongs," unquote. Knowing what we now do about both men, the good works and justice they are promoting will be inimical to the interests of the United States, and the injustice and wrongs they are fighting amount to measures intended to protect this country and its Constitution from their Sharia agenda. Which brings us fourth and finally to Suhail Khan's work on behalf of a particular priority for the Muslim Brotherhood, ending U.S. restrictions on the Islamists' ability to raise money in this country to finance jihad. As has been discussed in Part 2 of this course, under Sharia, Muslims must give a percentage of their income to charity through the practice known as zakat, or tithing. A minimum of 1/8 of such contributions must be given to jihad. Obviously, the problem is that such zakat, for that purpose, is considered material support for terrorism under U.S. law. As we'll explore further in Part 6 of this course, President Obama made a point in his first Muslim outreach speech at Al-Azhar University in Cairo in June 2009 of promising to remove what he called, quote, impediments, unquote, to Muslims' performance of their religious duty to tithe. The only impediments to zakat, however, are statutory prohibitions on materially supporting terrorists and their organizations. It turns out that Suhail Khan is once again advancing a cause that serves the interests of the Muslim Brotherhood and other entities powerfully motivated to halt our enforcement of the law barring material support for terrorism, at the expense of the security of Americans threatened with jihadist violence. Khan serves on the advisory board of a classic leftist Islamist axis, the Charity and Security Network. According to the network's December 2011 publication entitled U.S. Muslim Charities and the War on Terror, A Decade in Review, the organization's mission is aimed directly at this Brotherhood agenda item. Quote, "To eliminate barriers counterterrorism measures create for legitimate charitable development, human rights, and conflict resolution work," unquote. The question is, of course, what constitutes legitimate charitable work? For Sharia-adherent Muslims, that answer is easy. Zakat, in all its forms, like the rest of Sharia, is perfect, divinely directed, and immutable. By definition, it is legitimate, and the notion that some man-made laws could make it otherwise is inconceivable, unacceptable, and an offensive provocation. As with the Muslim Brotherhood's bridge building in the name of interfaith dialogue and the rest of the Ikhwan's stealthy civilization jihad, the Charity and Security Network's activities must be enormously gratifying to the Islamists
as it exemplifies their stated and unchanging goal, namely, to destroy us from within by our own hands. In sum, by any reasonable standard, Suhail Khan qualifies as a highly successful influence operative for the Ikhwan. In accordance with the tradecraft of this business, his principal role seems to be serving as Grover Norquist's handler for the Islamic Free Market Institute and many other initiatives. In that capacity, Khan has been directly involved in many, if not virtually all, of the identifiable operations to date aimed at subverting conservatives and the Republican Party. And Khan's efforts continue to this day. Which brings us back to Grover Norquist for an exploration of what that agent of influence and enabler has been doing in recent months and years, activities that make clear his involvement with domestic enemies of the United States are not confined to his work with Abdurrahman al-Amoudi in the late 1990s and Khalid Safouri and others in the early 21st century. Next, Grover Norquist's continuing contribution to the infrastructure of the civilization jihad.